you cannot build an internal combustion engine car if all you have built so far were horse-driven carts. There is kind of a hand-in-hand development of industry and research and engineering and science. It's not possible for the Germans to have had only saucers and nothing else of similar type bizarre weaponry. And at the beginning I thought, with the tradition of my country, in Eastern Europe we were told that, well, all the Germans had was some V1s and maybe some V2s, but did the V2s actually fly? Maybe not. Maybe these were plywood models. Some V2s fell over England, but did they hit London or not? Probably not. And I have a film that we can show later, we can see later, of the V1 and V2 offensive. 5,000 V2s were produced, and a lot of them hit London. And in the height of the V1 and V2 offensive, 1 million people were evacuated from London. England was on the brink of getting out of the war. If they were just a few weeks more advanced with the project. Anyway, in Bulgaria we were told that the V1s and the V2s were all the Germans had. Here is the V1 cross-section. Here is the V2. That's all. And then I started my research in some very hard-to-find books of this sort. Hitler's last weapons, Hitler's secret weapons, Hitler's vengeance weapons. Most of them are British books and are hard to find in this country. Secret weapons of World War II. Some of them are produced by neo-Nazi outfits, as the establishment labels them. The most incredible ones were actually here in this book by Samizdat in Canada. Die Deutsche Waffen und Geheimwaffen des Zweiten Weltkriegs. This is Rudolf Lussar, a patent bureau officer, was the first one to mention in the official literature the existence of German flying saucers. In this book, this is an extremely rare book to find. Published in Germany, and when it was translated in English, here it was shortened, as it happens always with the books that have dangerous information. And many other books. I have made a big volume of these, and this is just a small part of them. Very hard to find books, basically collector items. And I have found sometimes a single photograph from a book. So rare are these photos. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you would just go over it without realizing, and I would give many examples here. They have a photograph of a spacesuit, of a pilot sitting in the cockpit of this twin-engine turbojet stealth fighter bomber built by the Horten brothers. But if you are not suspecting German space flights, you will think that this is a pilot suit only. Only after you carefully, because there is no text underneath to explain, after you analyze the spacesuit carefully, you realize that it is way more advanced than the Vostok and Gemini spacesuit. Let's go very quickly through the cornucopia of killing devices that the Germans created. I was astonished myself many times over. Mini remote-controlled demolition tanks, giant minesweeper tanks, so heavy that the mine won't be even able to lift it. The exploding mine wouldn't do anything to the tank. A cannon that would blow air circles, like the circles coming from a pipe. Smoke rings. This is a smoke ring cannon against low-flying airplanes. When this turbulence hits the wing of the plane, it loses lift and crashes in the ground. Fired by coal. This was probably the only cannon in the world that was firing with powderized coal. They didn't have gasoline or explosives at the end of the war. And the German genius found a solution again. Almost straight out of the comics, This is a submachine gun that fires around the corner with this special periscope here. The prototype of the Kalashnikov gun, probably one of the best submachine guns in the world, and then to this time, the Kalashnikov is almost a carbon copy of it. A night vision infrared scope, a projector with a scope. Here's only the projector. This is an infrared heat-seeking homing device for their anti-aircraft rockets. I mean, things that I, as an engineer, as a physicist, never imagined existed in World War II Germany. This is not only the snorkels for their U-boats, but this is a stealth technology. This is a radar invisible snorkel. Recently I heard from Al Bielek that the Germans were experimenting with Philadelphia technology on their U-boats. But unlike the Americans, they were experimenting with the U-boats running in water, which introduces one more variable in the equation. And the equation backfired and they lost all the U-boats. They never came back. They lost them in hyperspace somewhere. So some of the tabloid stories of German U-boats that resurfaced and were captured by the American Navy just a few months ago. I mean, in '92 there was a big tabloid story in Weekly World News. Maybe just that. Some of these U-boats surfaced way back in space and time, as did a lot of the sailors. Some of the sailors that disappeared on the Philadelphia experiment, some of them were found embedded in a brick wall in an Italian bar in Milan. Others appeared in a restaurant in Brooklyn from a back room, and there was no back room. They just walked through the wall. I mean, so many bizarre things happened through the Philadelphia technology. But anyway, this is not just an insulated case of a stealth technology. They were, I mean, because on the higher levels, what the Americans have is immediately transmitted to the Germans and vice versa. It is the same Knights Templar secret society and the same secret world bankers that finance both sides of a war. These are the guys that move the briefcases with the secret documents and make sure that if the Germans invent the rockets, there will be rockets in the British and the Russians too.
I know that in 1936 there was over 100 U.S. corporations inside Nazi Germany helping to build their war machine.
Excellent.
And there was also great
we'll come to that. I'd like you to say this when the time comes. I'll be talking about the secret behind-the-scenes collusion. Right now we are only at the level of the hardware.
Okay.
Stealth technology. Well, these are machine guns that were firing upwards from a fighter plane. At the belly of the bombers, this was their least defended part. Who has ever seen a machine gun mounted in this way on a fighter plane? I mean, incredible solutions that show that the Germans had the guts, the fantasy, the imagination, the engineering and scientific mastery, brilliance. I mean, I was so much impressed. Other books on the same topic. This is two bombers joined together with a fifth engine added in between to pull their giant gliders. Anybody seen and this is the giant glider that this bomber was pulling before they mounted engines on it. This is a little bit smaller than the jumbo jet. Could carry a tank. The front section opens, made up of canvas. They were made for the invasion of England, and 100 of them would have landed one tank division, 100 kilometers of London, with nothing in between but a home guard, some poorly armed guys. It's probably a last-minute Illuminati intervention, not to invade England, but to hit the Russians instead. But this is 60 feet tall, the cabin from the ground. I mean, this is a monstrous plane. Why didn't they show the photographs for 40 years after the war? Because they didn't want to create the impression in us that everything we have in our Luftwaffe here came from the German Luftwaffe. This is the best fighter plane in the world, a twin engine, twin propeller, push-pull combination. the Dornier Anteater, the Dornier 335, the fastest propeller plane during the whole war. Vertical takeoff and landing capability through pitching the engine. This is basically a short takeoff and landing somewhere in the mid-30s. Extremely innovative designs. Asymmetric cabin and body with this stabilizer missing, not shot off. This is how the plane was designed. This is a reconnaissance plane by, I think this is, what is it, Blom and Voss. Uncle Igor Sikorsky invented the helicopter hogwash. The Germans had these helicopters in their Kriegsmarine operational since '41. Sikorsky's helicopters could barely get off the ground at the time. I found a photograph recently of a whole wing of about, I don't know, 20 machines of these parked on the tarmac. But we see, I found a family of probably 20 different machines. The Japanese were given most of the German technology in secret, and they experimented with similar machines like the German ones. This is a kind of a interesting flying wing, basically a canard, exactly, canard configuration with a pushing propeller. And they were probably expecting to get a turbojet engine for here, turboprop engine. This is a French plane that was further worked on by the Germans. Very interesting configuration, and the cabin is hidden in the vertical stabilizer. This V-shaped egg beater type configuration of the Flettner helicopter has never been used since, because this was the most stable helicopter that the Germans built and that the Americans tested. Much stable than all of their helicopters. Even to the point I am suspecting that these propellers here are mounted on a lot simpler pitch and yaw mechanism than the normal helicopters. And the reason for the blacklisting of this design by the Illuminati is that a third world nation can easily duplicate this one. But the single propeller scheme that we are using nowadays is a lot more difficult to build, because there the mechanism is a lot more complicated. I've discovered many such simple technologies that were blacklisted for once, and they've never been used for half a century, because this would lower the technology threshold and third world nations would be able to produce the technology. Here the Illuminati want to keep it in their hands only.
Okay.
Turbojet engines. The first turbojet plane flew in 1939. The first British jet flew in 1943 or 4, almost at the time the war ended. This is a Henkel 176 or something. The Messerschmitt 262 was the first operational fighter plane. I was astonished to find in a Tokyo bookstore photographs of the Messerschmitt 262. I said, Jesus Christ, how come the Germans had turbojet planes? How come the Russians never told us? I mean, I lived for 30 years in Eastern Europe and they never mentioned these things. And then you realize how nicely the propaganda massages your mind and then brainwashes your mind. And then I discovered incredible planes, flying wings, strategic bombers that were meant to bomb New York. Unbelievable stuff. This is a prototype, I mean the forefather of all the MiG 15 and up fighter planes. And this is a swing wing, variable geometry, Messerschmitt 321 fighter plane. A variable geometry plane before the war ended. It took the Allies 20, 30, 40 years to regurgitate what the Germans built before them. And some of the designs have never been put into practice because they are either too effective or too difficult to build. It's not the shuttle that was piggybacked on top of another plane first. They had a pilot plane, a father and son combination. This is a plane laden with explosive. Actually, this is a giant cumulative charge, like an armor-penetrating charge, but the size of a bomber, and the fighter would disengage, directing the plane at a ship or a factory. In the case of a factory, they would crash the ship along the long line of the assembly line of the factory. And when this cumulative charge explodes, it produces an acetylene torch flame that's probably, I don't want to say half a mile, but probably several hundred yards long. And this jet blows away all the machinery from the factory, basically wipes clean the factory floor of all machinery. Just one single charge of this plane. Have we ever seen such devices on this side of the... I don't remember. The Horten brothers produced a family of 20 flying wings, from small personal gliders to supersonic flying wings. It's not Chuck Yeager who beat the sound barrier first. I mean, many were before him. Up to giant transport or bomber flying wings. This is a small glider in 38, motorized bigger versions of so many different configurations. I mean, if it were not for the secret Illuminati siphoning of this secret technology from the Germans to the Americans, Northrop in his designs was basically copying, making carbon copies of the Dornier of the Horten brothers design. This is a flying wing assault glider by the German, this is the Flugfahrt, the Aeroflight Society. And this is a rare photograph of their turbojet flying wing, the Horten 6 with a brake parachute, secretly examined in a British Air Force base in November 45. This is the propeller version of that plane in a fighter configuration with pushing propellers, the Horten 5. This is a glider of the turbojet version. Anybody seen such a craft? This is a Henschel 132 Freedom Fighter. They didn't have time to put the engine inside, so they just strapped the engine on top of the craft. The pilot is lying in a prone position to minimize the air resistance. And these were the craft that they were building in the underground factories in Germany in the last months of the war. Extensive research in turbojet weaponry. The prototype of a Stinger missile. This is a shoulder launch anti-aircraft multiple rocket launcher, shoulder carried and shoulder fired. The Fliegerfaust for low flying airplanes. This is a ramjet driven, they had also rocket engine driven assault boats, demolition boats and commando boats, both German and Italian. Some more helicopters here in high-G maneuvers. Some additional helicopters. Saddam Hussein started building his giant gun that has a caliber of 1 meter. This is the inside of the gun. The gun itself is probably 2 meters wide. Here, this is the gun. He didn't know, he didn't do his research well. He could have done it much cheaper with a technology that you can master in any village foundry shop. But you have to have the German genius. What the Germans did was, this slide is inverted. This is the gun, and this is how the bullet travels. And as the bullet goes successively through these explosive chambers, it makes an electric contact and ignites the chambers behind it, which fire and increase the pressure in the tube, and the bullet and the projectile flies faster and faster and faster. And these were built in underground tunnels at 45 degrees inclination and could fire a 2 meter long rocket. Depending on the length of the barrel, you can have 20 meters, you can have 50 meters. The longer, the bigger the weight of the craft.
We got to stop the tape. It's every
Yep.
2 hours.